There's a thin line between love and hate, a narrow path as vast as fear. You follow to truth and end nowhere. There's a thin line between pedigree and providence. Your ancestors manifest on your face, and it's the surveillance of a family you can't escape. Or prejudice decides you're out of place. Or your bloodline is tainted with disgrace, a paternal poison that you can't trace. There's a thin line between sex and power, a fine, fragile knot that binds fear to masculinity, submission to insecurity, a vibrating wave that blurs the difference between possessions and possession, between talking and conversation, between dearth and domination. There's a thin line between transactions and transfigurations. Follow the paper trail. All hail the local kid who done good, the local kid who left the hood. Oh yeah, we always knew he would. We would leave too if we could, but the odds don't factor in our favor. He was tapped on the shoulder by a burning bush or by someone from the bush. So he's in parliament or he's a prophet, because either way he's pocketing profit, because between God and government, he drew a thin line. Something sinister, something divine. There's a thin line between church and state. A streak of purple, royal, primarily yellow, loyal. There's a thin line between faith and religion, between rationality and reason, between truth and treason. There's a thin line between democracy and mob mentality, as slender as the largest disparity, as slim as the fate of thread slipped around a neck and see, they finally snapped. They, the multitude, the majority, the mass, the accumulation of minorities throwing stones in glass houses. They arise as one voice in pitch, a crowd of confirmation. Preach to the choir. Tell them of the higher power that is for hire. Preach. How to purchase prosperity on the cheap. Preach. Of the power of one growing exponentially. Preach. Unless it's compounded by inaction. Preach. Because 0 times 0 is still 0. Preach. Because 0 times 0 is still 0. Preach. Because 0 times 0 is still 0. Preach. There's a thin line between believing and desperation. Sorry, there's a thin line between faith and desperation, between believing and having no choice but to believe. There's a thin line between rejection and repression, a hollow valley embracing 2 mountains of silence. There's a thin line between love and hate, as peaceful as a dam before it breaks, a thin line that trails destruction in its wake.